The grand hall of Ashford Manor fell silent as the Duke's voice thundered through the marble corridors, his words cutting sharper than any blade. Miss Eleanor Hartley stood before him, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes downcast, yet her spine remained unbowed. The servants held their breath, the children she had come to adore watched from the shadows, and the woman who had orchestrated this moment, the Duke's intended bride, smiled with cold satisfaction. What had begun as a simple position had become something far more dangerous. Eleanor had committed the unforgivable sin. She had captured the heart of a man who believed himself incapable of love, and now she would pay the price. But as the Duke's rage echoed through the ancestral home, no one suspected that this governess possessed a secret that would shake the very foundations of English nobility. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The autumn of 1887 arrived at Hartley House with its customary elegance, painting the Gloucestershire countryside in shades of amber and gold. Eleanor Hartley stood at her bedroom window, watching the morning mist rise from the manicured gardens, and felt the familiar weight of expectation settle upon her shoulders like an invisible cloak. At 22, Eleanor possessed the kind of beauty that painters sought to capture, delicate features framed by chestnut hair that caught the light like burnished copper, eyes the color of spring moss, and a complexion that spoke of good breeding and careful protection from the sun. Yet it was her mind that truly set her apart, though she had learned early that intelligence in a woman was best kept hidden, like a scandalous letter tucked away in a drawer. "Eleanor, darling, you must come down." Her mother's voice drifted up the stairs, tinged with the particular anxiety that had become constant these past months. "Mr. Pemberton will be here within the hour, and you know how your father values punctuality." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Mr. Pemberton. The name alone seemed to carry the weight of inevitability. He was the son of Baron Pemberton, a man of considerable wealth and impeccable lineage, whose estate bordered their own. The match had been arranged since Eleanor was 17, a careful negotiation between her father and the Baron over port and cigars, as if she were a prized mare being traded between stables. She descended the curved staircase with practiced grace, her morning dress of pale blue silk rustling softly. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, every polished surface reflecting the life that had been carefully constructed for her. Hartley House was not the grandest estate in Gloucestershire, but it was respectable, maintained through careful management and strategic marriages. Eleanor was the eldest daughter, and upon her rested the responsibility of securing the family's continued prosperity. Her father, Sir Edmund Hartley, stood in the drawing-room, his silver hair immaculately groomed, his posture military straight despite his 60 years. He had been a colonel in his youth, and he ran his household with the same precision he had once commanded his regiment. "There you are," he said, his tone neither warm nor cold, simply matter of fact. "I trust you understand the importance of today's meeting. Mr. Pemberton wishes to formalize the arrangements. The wedding will take place in the spring at St. Mary's." Eleanor nodded, her hands folded demurely before her. "Yes, father. Good girl." He returned his attention to the newspaper, the conversation concluded in his mind. Her mother, Lady Catherine, fussed with the flower arrangements, her nervous energy filling the room. She was a woman who had learned to find purpose in the small details, having long ago surrendered any larger ambitions. "You look lovely, dear. That color suits you beautifully. Mr. Pemberton is a fortunate man." Was he? Eleanor wondered silently. Or was she the fortunate one? This was what she had been raised for, after all, to make an advantageous match, to manage a household, to produce heirs. Her education had been carefully curated, enough French and Italian to be charming at dinner parties, sufficient piano skills to entertain guests, a working knowledge of household management, and absolutely nothing that might threaten a husband's intellectual superiority. Yet in the quiet hours of night, Eleanor had pursued her own education. She had devoured the books in her father's library that were deemed unsuitable for young ladies: philosophy, political economy, natural sciences. She had taught herself Latin and Greek, had studied the great thinkers, had filled journals with her own observations and theories. It was her secret rebellion, her private world where she could be more than an ornament. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced Mr. Pemberton's arrival. Eleanor's heart began to race, though not with anticipation. She had met her intended husband numerous times over the years, had sat through countless dinners and social gatherings, and each encounter had left her feeling more hollow than the last. Sterling Pemberton entered the drawing-room with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. At 35, he was considered handsome in a conventional way, tall, with dark hair carefully pomaded, sharp features, and eyes that assessed everything with the cold calculation of a banker evaluating assets. He wore his wealth ostentatiously, from the gold watch chain stretched across his waistcoat to the diamond pin in his cravat. "Sir Edmund, Lady Catherine," he greeted them with a slight bow before turning his attention to Eleanor. "Miss Hartley, you look well." "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton," Eleanor replied, offering her hand, which he took with perfunctory courtesy. They settled into the ritual of tea, the conversation flowing along predetermined channels. The weather, the upcoming season in London, mutual acquaintances, the state of the roads. Sterling dominated the discussion, as he always did, speaking with absolute certainty on every topic. When Eleanor ventured a comment about a recent article she'd read regarding agricultural reform, he smiled indulgently. "My dear Miss Hartley, such matters need not concern you. Leave the business of estates and politics to those equipped to handle them. A wife's domain is the home, and I assure you, Pemberton Hall will provide ample occupation for your attentions." Eleanor felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but maintained her composure. "Of course, Mr. Pemberton. I have been reviewing the arrangements with your father," Sterling continued, addressing Sir Edmund rather than Eleanor, as if she were merely a witness to her own future. "The settlement is generous, I believe you'll agree. Miss Hartley will want for nothing. I expect her to take her place in society as befits the wife of a future baron. There will be entertaining to manage, charitable committees to chair, and in time, children to raise." He spoke of her life as if reading from a ledger, each item checked off with business-like efficiency. Eleanor found herself studying him with a detachment that surprised her. This was the man she would wake beside for the rest of her life, the father of her children, her constant companion, yet she felt nothing, no warmth, no connection, not even active dislike, just a vast, echoing emptiness. "I have taken the liberty of engaging a wedding planner from London," Sterling announced. "Mrs. Ashworth comes highly recommended. She will coordinate with Lady Catherine, of course, but I want everything to be perfect. The Pembertons have a reputation to uphold." "How thoughtful," Lady Catherine murmured, though Eleanor detected a note of disappointment. Her mother had likely hoped to manage the wedding herself. As the visit progressed, Sterling outlined his expectations with increasing specificity. Eleanor would be expected to dismiss her current lady's maid and accept one chosen by his mother, who would ensure she was dressed appropriately for her new station. She would need to familiarize herself with the Pemberton family history and connections. There were certain families they associated with and others they did not. She would be expected to produce an heir within the first 2 years of marriage. "I trust this is all agreeable?" Sterling asked, though his tone suggested that agreement was assumed rather than requested. "Perfectly agreeable," Sir Edmund responded on Eleanor's behalf. When Sterling finally departed, promising to call again the following week, Eleanor felt as though she could breathe again. She excused herself and retreated to the library, her sanctuary within the gilded cage of Hartley House. The room smelled of leather and old paper, of knowledge and possibility. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines of the books, drawing comfort from their presence. Here, at least, she could be herself, could think thoughts that were her own, could imagine a life beyond the narrow confines of what was expected. She pulled down a volume of Mary Wollstonecraft's writings, a book her father would be horrified to know she possessed. As she read the passionate arguments for women's education and independence, Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. These were dangerous ideas, revolutionary thoughts that had no place in the life of a future baroness, yet they resonated in her soul like a bell struck in a silent room. "There you are." Her younger sister, Beatrice, appeared in the doorway, her 17-year-old face alight with curiosity. "How did it go with Mr. Pemberton? Is the wedding truly to be in the spring?" Eleanor closed the book carefully. "Yes, it seems so." Beatrice flopped into a chair with the careless grace of youth. "You don't sound very excited. He's terribly handsome and rich, and you'll be a baroness someday. Isn't that what every girl dreams of?" "Is it what you dream of?" Eleanor asked gently. Her sister considered this, her brow furrowing. "I suppose I haven't thought much about it. But you've always been so sensible, Eleanor, so good at doing what's expected. I rather admire it, actually. I'm forever getting into scrapes." Eleanor smiled despite herself. Beatrice was everything she was not. Impulsive, emotional, unguarded. Their mother despaired of ever making her into a proper lady. Perhaps being sensible is overrated. "Eleanor Hartley, did you just say something rebellious?" Beatrice gasped in mock horror. "Quick, I must write this down. It may never happen again." They laughed together, and for a moment Eleanor felt the weight lift. But it settled back quickly, heavier than before. In 6 months, she would be Mrs. Sterling Pemberton. She would leave this house, this library, this last vestige of freedom. She would step into a role that had been written for her before she was born, and she would play it until the final curtain fell. That evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she stood once more at her window, looking out over the darkened gardens. Somewhere beyond the manicured lawns and carefully tended hedgerows lay a wider world, full of possibilities she would never explore, ideas she would never voice, a self she would never become. She thought of Sterling's words, "A wife's domain is the home." It was a comfortable prison, lined with silk and softened with privilege, but it was a prison nonetheless. As she climbed into bed, Eleanor made a silent promise to herself. She would fulfill her duty, would marry Sterling Pemberton, would become the perfect baroness. But somewhere, in the private chambers of her heart, she would remain herself. She would continue to read, to think, to question. It would be her secret rebellion, her small act of defiance against a world that demanded her complete surrender. She could not have known, as sleep finally claimed her, that fate was preparing a very different path, that within a year she would find herself far from Gloucestershire, in a household where her intelligence would be valued rather than suppressed, where she would discover that love could be something other than a business arrangement, and where her silence would indeed speak louder than any words. The golden cage was beautiful, but Eleanor Hartley was about to discover that some birds were never meant to be caged at all. The spring of 1888 arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself conspired to make Eleanor's wedding day perfect. St. Mary's Church stood resplendent in the Gloucestershire sunshine, its ancient stones adorned with white roses and trailing ivy. Every pew was filled with the county's finest families, their silks and satins creating a kaleidoscope of pastel hues. The air was thick with expensive perfume and barely concealed gossip. Eleanor stood in the vestibule, her wedding gown a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace, commissioned from London's most exclusive modiste. The dress had cost more than most families earned in a year, with its elaborate train, seed pearl embroidery, and delicate veil that cascaded from a diamond tiara, a Pemberton family heirloom that Sterling's mother had presented with more duty than warmth. "You look like a princess," Beatrice whispered, adjusting Eleanor's veil with trembling fingers. Her sister's eyes were bright with unshed tears, though whether they were tears of joy or sorrow, Eleanor could not say. Lady Catherine fussed with the train, her own eyes suspiciously moist. "My darling girl, my beautiful, perfect girl." She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, overcome with emotion. Sir Edmund stood apart, checking his pocket watch with military precision. "It's time," he announced. "The ceremony should begin precisely at 11 o'clock. Mr. Pemberton values punctuality." Eleanor took her father's arm, feeling the stiffness in his posture, the formal distance he maintained even in this intimate moment. Through the open doors, she could see the assembled guests turning in their seats, craning their necks for a glimpse of the bride. The organ swelled with the opening bars of the processional. As she began her slow walk down the aisle, Eleanor's eyes found Sterling at the altar. He stood tall and imposing in his mourning coat, his dark hair gleaming, his expression one of satisfied possession. Beside him stood his best man, Lord Ashford, and Eleanor's gaze lingered there for a moment, noting the contrast between the two men. Where Sterling was all sharp angles and cold calculation, Lord Ashford possessed a warmth in his bearing, though she knew him only slightly from social gatherings. The ceremony proceeded with ritualistic precision. Eleanor spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, though the words felt like stones in her mouth. Sterling's responses were confident, almost triumphant. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Sterling's kiss was brief and perfunctory, more acclaiming than an expression of affection. The wedding breakfast was held at Pemberton Hall, Sterling's ancestral estate. The house was a monument to wealth and power, a sprawling Palladian mansion with formal gardens that stretched to the horizon. Inside, the ballroom had been transformed into a bower of white flowers and crystal. 300 guests filled the space, their chatter and laughter echoing off the gilded ceiling. Eleanor moved through the receiving line in a daze, accepting congratulations from people whose names blurred together. Sterling remained at her side, his hand possessively at her elbow, steering her through the social choreography with practiced ease. "Smile, my dear," he murmured in her ear. "You look far too serious for a bride." She arranged her features into what she hoped was an appropriate expression of happiness, though her face felt stiff, like a mask that didn't quite fit. The wedding breakfast itself was a lavish affair, course after course of elaborate dishes. Champagne flowing freely, toasts that grew increasingly effusive as the afternoon wore on. Eleanor barely tasted the food, her corset laced so tightly she could scarcely breathe, let alone eat. It was during the dessert course that Eleanor first noticed something amiss. Sterling had been drinking steadily throughout the meal, his face flushed, his laughter growing louder and less controlled. He leaned close to Lord Ashford, whispering something that made his friend's expression darken with concern. "Sterling, perhaps you should—" Lord Ashford began, but Sterling waved him off with an irritated gesture. "Don't be such a bore, Ashford. It's my wedding day. A man's entitled to celebrate." As the tables were cleared and the orchestra began to play, Sterling led Eleanor to the center of the ballroom for their first dance as husband and wife. The guests formed a circle around them, watching with indulgent smiles as the newlyweds waltzed. But Sterling's steps were unsteady, his grip on Eleanor's waist too tight, almost painful. His breath, when he leaned close, reeked of champagne and brandy. "Do you know what I paid for all this?" he hissed in her ear, his voice slurred. "The dress, the flowers, the food, a fortune. And for what? To shackle myself to a woman whose only recommendation is her father's respectable name and a pretty face." Eleanor stiffened, missing a step. "Sterling, you're not yourself. Perhaps we should—" "Not myself?" He laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Oh, I'm very much myself, Mrs. Pemberton. Perhaps for the first time today. Do you want to know a secret?" The music continued, but Eleanor was acutely aware of the guests watching them, their smiles beginning to falter as they sensed something wrong. "There's someone else," Sterling continued, his voice carrying further than he seemed to realize. "Someone I actually want, someone with fire and passion, not this insipid, bookish pretense of virtue." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "Sterling, please, not here, not now." but he was beyond reason, beyond discretion. The alcohol had loosened whatever restraints he normally maintained, and years of resentment came pouring out. "Do you think I wanted this marriage?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You were chosen for me, just as I was chosen for you. A business arrangement, a merger of properties and bloodlines, but I'll be damned if I'll pretend to be grateful for it." The music faltered and stopped. The ballroom fell silent. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Eleanor felt her face burn with humiliation, but she kept her composure, kept her voice low and steady. "Sterling, you're drunk. Let's go somewhere private and discuss this." "Private?" He released her so abruptly she stumbled. "Why should we be private? Let them all hear. Let them know what a farce this is." From the edge of the crowd, Eleanor saw her father's face, purple with rage and mortification. Her mother had gone pale, swaying on her feet. Beatrice looked stricken, her hand pressed to her mouth. Sterling turned to address the assembled guests, his arms spread wide in a gesture of mock grandeur. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my wife, Miss Eleanor Hartley. No, forgive me, Mrs. Sterling Pemberton, accomplished in all the womanly arts, obedient, dutiful, utterly, completely boring." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was beyond the pale, beyond anything that could be excused or overlooked. This was social annihilation. "But fear not," Sterling continued, his words dripping with venom. "I have no intention of suffering alone. My dear wife will have the privilege of managing my household, bearing my children, and turning a blind eye to my amusements. Isn't that right, Eleanor? That's what good wives do, after all." Eleanor stood frozen, every eye upon her, waiting to see how she would respond. Her mind raced, searching for words, for some way to salvage this catastrophe. But what could she say? How could she defend herself against such a public assault? It was then that movement caught her eye. A woman emerged from the crowd, Charlotte Fairfax, the daughter of a neighboring estate, a girl Eleanor had known since childhood. Charlotte was beautiful in a bold, striking way, with raven hair and dark eyes that sparkled with malicious triumph. "Oh, Sterling," Charlotte purred, gliding to his side with feline grace. "You've had too much champagne, darling. You're saying things you'll regret." The endearment hung in the air like poison. "Darling," the familiarity in her tone, the possessive way she touched his arm, it all became horrifyingly clear. Sterling smiled at Charlotte with a warmth he had never shown Eleanor. "Will I? I think not. I think it's time everyone knew the truth. Charlotte and I have an understanding. We have for months. Years, really." Charlotte had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable, but she didn't step away. Instead, she lifted her chin defiantly, meeting Eleanor's gaze with something like pity mixed with satisfaction. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," Charlotte said, though her tone suggested she was anything but. "But you must have known. Everyone knew. Sterling and I were meant for each other. You were just the acceptable choice, the safe choice. I'm the one he loves." The word love seemed to echo through the silent ballroom. Eleanor felt something crack inside her, not her heart. She had never loved Sterling enough for that, but her pride, her dignity, the carefully constructed image of herself as someone who could navigate society's demands with grace. "This is unconscionable." Lord Ashford's voice cut through the tension. He stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Sterling, you're making a fool of yourself and insulting your wife. Apologize at once." "Apologize?" Sterling laughed. "For speaking the truth." "I think not, Ashford. You of all people should understand. You've never let duty dictate your heart." Eleanor found her voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Why did you marry me then? If Charlotte is who you wanted, why go through with this?" Sterling's expression hardened, all traces of drunken bonhomie vanishing. "Because Charlotte's father lost his fortune in bad investments. She has nothing to offer but her pretty face. You, on the other hand, come with land, connections, and a dowry that will shore up the Pemberton finances nicely. It's called being practical, my dear." something you should appreciate, given your bookish inclinations." The cruelty of it stole Eleanor's breath. She had known the marriage was arranged, had accepted that love was not part of the equation. But this calculated humiliation, this public revelation of her worthlessness beyond her monetary value, was more than she could bear. She looked around the ballroom at the sea of faces, some shocked, some pitying, some gleeful at the scandal unfolding before them. She saw her father's rigid fury, her mother's tears, Beatrice's anguish. She saw the Dowager Lady Pemberton, Sterling's mother, her face a mask of cold disapproval, directed not at her son but at Eleanor, as if this were somehow her fault. "I see," Eleanor said quietly. She reached up with trembling fingers and removed the diamond tiara, the Pemberton family heirloom. She held it out to Sterling. "Then I release you from this burden." "What are you doing?" Sterling demanded, suddenly seeming to realize that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. "I'm giving you what you want, your freedom." Eleanor's voice grew stronger, clearer. "I will not remain where I am not wanted. I will not spend my life as a convenient repository for your name and fortune while you pursue your true desires elsewhere." "You can't just leave," Sterling sputtered. "We're married. The vows have been spoken. You're my wife, legally bound—" "Legally, perhaps," Eleanor interrupted. "But I will not be bound in spirit. I will not be humiliated further." She turned to her father, who stood rigid with shock and rage. "Father, I'm sorry. I know this brings shame upon our family, but I will not continue with this farce." Sir Edmund's voice was like ice. "Eleanor, you will return to your husband's side at once. This is unacceptable behavior." "No more unacceptable than his," Eleanor replied, surprised by her own courage. "I have been obedient all my life. I have done everything expected of me. But I will not sacrifice my last shred of dignity for the sake of appearances." She gathered her skirts, the elaborate train that had seemed so beautiful now feeling like chains. As she moved toward the door, the crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, no one daring to touch her or speak. "If you walk out that door, you'll be ruined," Sterling called after her, his voice sharp with panic now. "No one will receive you. You'll be a social pariah." Eleanor paused at the threshold, turning back one final time. Her eyes met his, and in that moment she saw him clearly. Not as the distinguished gentleman society believed him to be, but as a small, cruel man who measured his worth by his ability to control and diminish others. "Then I shall be ruined," she said simply. "It seems a small price to pay for my freedom." She walked out of Pemberton Hall into the spring sunshine, leaving behind her wedding, her marriage, her carefully planned future. She had no idea where she would go or what she would do. She knew only that she could not stay, could not pretend that what had happened was acceptable or forgivable. Behind her, the ballroom erupted in chaos. Voices raised in shock and speculation, her mother's wails, her father's furious demands that she return. But Eleanor kept walking, her white dress trailing through the gravel drive, her veil catching on the breeze. She had been raised to be silent, to be obedient, to accept whatever life handed her with grace and gratitude. But her silence in that ballroom, her refusal to defend or explain or plead, had spoken louder than any words could have. It had said, "I am worth more than this. I deserve more than this, and I will not settle for less, no matter the cost." As she reached the end of the drive, Eleanor heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Beatrice running toward her, her own dress hiked up scandalously, tears streaming down her face. "Eleanor, wait!" her sister cried. "You can't go alone. Let me come with you." Eleanor embraced her sister tightly, drawing strength from her loyalty. "No, darling, you must stay. This is my battle, not yours." "But where will you go? What will you do?" Eleanor looked out at the road stretching before her, leading away from everything she had ever known. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'll find a way. I must." She kissed her sister's forehead, and then, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, "Eleanor Hartley, no, Eleanor Pemberton, though she would never use that name, walked away from her old life and toward an uncertain future, her head held high despite the tears that finally began to fall. The London rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the cobblestones of Bloomsbury into rivers of grey. Eleanor stood beneath the modest portico of number 14 Bedford Square, her travelling cloak soaked through, her single carpet bag clutched in trembling hands. 3 weeks had passed since she had walked away from Pemberton Hall. 3 weeks of hiding in coaching inns and small hotels, living on the modest sum she had managed to withdraw from her personal account before her father could freeze her access to funds. She had written only one letter in all that time, addressed to her father's sister, Aunt Agatha Hartley, a woman she barely knew, but who represented her last hope of sanctuary. Agatha had never married, had scandalized the family decades ago by refusing an advantageous match and choosing instead to live independently in London, supporting herself through writing articles for progressive journals under a male pseudonym. The family spoke of her rarely, and always with a mixture of embarrassment and grudging admiration. Eleanor raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if Agatha refused her? What if even this unconventional aunt found Eleanor's actions too shocking to countenance? But she had nowhere else to go. Her mother's letters, forwarded through a sympathetic former governess, had made it clear that Eleanor was no longer welcome at Hartley House. Her father had disowned her publicly, declaring that he had no eldest daughter. Sterling had begun annulment proceedings, citing abandonment and mental instability. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman in her late 50s with iron-grey hair swept into an untidy bun, sharp grey eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and an expression of keen intelligence that reminded Eleanor startlingly of her own reflection. "Well," Agatha Hartley said, looking Eleanor up and down with frank assessment, "you look like a drowned cat. Come in before you catch your death." The interior of the house was unlike anything Eleanor had expected. Where Hartley House and Pemberton Hall had been monuments to tradition and propriety, Agatha's home was a glorious chaos of books, papers, and curiosities. Every surface was covered with manuscripts, journals, and correspondence. The walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves, and the air smelled of ink, tea, and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco. "I don't apologize for the mess," Agatha said briskly, leading Eleanor into a cluttered sitting room where a fire burned cheerfully in the grate. "I'm a working woman, not a society hostess. Mrs. Davies," she called, "bring tea and something hot to eat. My niece has arrived." A plump, motherly woman appeared from the back of the house, took one look at Eleanor's bedraggled state, and clucked sympathetically. "Poor lamb. I'll bring up some of my beef stew. You look half-starved." Agatha gestured for Eleanor to sit in a worn but comfortable armchair near the fire. "Now then, I received your letter. Quite the scandal you've created. The newspapers have been full of it. The runaway bride, they're calling you. Some are sympathetic, most are not. Society does love to punish a woman who steps out of line." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past 3 weeks. "I'm sorry to impose upon you, Aunt Agatha. I had nowhere else to turn." "Impose?" Agatha snorted. "My dear girl, you're the most interesting thing to happen to this family in decades. I'm only sorry it took a public humiliation to bring you to my door. Now, tell me everything, and don't leave out the sordid details. I want to know exactly what that pompous-ass Pemberton said." Over tea and Mrs. Davies's excellent stew, Eleanor recounted the entire story. Agatha listened without interruption, her expression growing progressively darker as Eleanor described Sterling's drunken revelations and Charlotte Fairfax's triumphant appearance. "The absolute bastard," Agatha said when Eleanor finished, her language shocking Eleanor despite everything. "Pardon my French, but there's no other word for it. And your father disowned you? For refusing to be publicly humiliated? The man's a fool. Always has been. My brother values appearances over everything, including his own daughter's dignity." "I don't know what to do," Eleanor admitted, her voice breaking. "I have no money, no prospects, no reputation. I'm ruined, just as Sterling promised." Agatha leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Ruined according to whom? According to a society that values a woman's obedience over her humanity, according to men who treat their wives as property. My dear Eleanor, you're not ruined. You're free. And freedom, while terrifying, is also the most precious gift you'll ever receive. But how am I to live? I can't return home. I can't marry. What options do I have?" "More than you think," Agatha said firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need. And while you're here, you're going to learn what it means to be an independent woman. You're going to use that considerable brain I suspect you've been hiding all these years. You're going to discover who Eleanor Hartley truly is, beneath all the layers of expectation and propriety." Over the following weeks, Eleanor began to emerge from her shell of shock and grief. Agatha's household operated on principles entirely foreign to Eleanor's upbringing. There were no rigid meal times, no formal dress codes, no endless rules about what was and wasn't proper. Agatha worked at her writing desk for hours each day, producing articles on women's education, property rights, and social reform. She received visitors at all hours, writers, activists, artists, and intellectuals who gathered in her sitting room to debate ideas and plan campaigns. Eleanor was initially overwhelmed by the energy and passion of these gatherings. She sat quietly in corners, listening as men and women argued about philosophy, politics, and social change with equal fervor. It was revolutionary to see women's opinions valued, their voices heard without condescension or dismissal. "You're very quiet," a voice said one evening. Eleanor looked up to find a young woman settling into the chair beside her. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair and warm brown eyes, dressed in a practical walking suit rather than evening finery. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. "I'm not accustomed to such gatherings. I don't wish to intrude." "Intrude? This is Agatha's house. Everyone's welcome here. I'm Margaret Thornton, by the way. I teach at the North London Collegiate School for Girls. Agatha mentioned you were staying with her." "Eleanor Hartley," she replied, then hesitated. "Or perhaps Eleanor Pemberton. I'm not certain which name I'm entitled to use anymore." Margaret's expression softened with understanding. "Ah, you're the runaway bride. I thought you looked familiar from the newspaper sketches, though they didn't do you justice. That took remarkable courage, what you did." "It didn't feel like courage," Eleanor admitted. "It felt like desperation." "Courage often does," Margaret said gently. "Tell me, Eleanor, what did you study before your marriage? What interests you?" It was such a simple question, yet no one had asked it in years. Eleanor found herself talking about her secret education, the books she had read in her father's library, her fascination with philosophy and natural sciences, her journals filled with observations and theories. Margaret listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she took Eleanor's intellectual pursuits seriously. "Have you considered teaching?" she asked. "We're always looking for educated women at the school. The pay isn't lavish, but it's honest work, and you'd be helping to educate the next generation of girls." "I've never taught," Eleanor said doubtfully. "I have no training, no credentials. You have education and intelligence, which is more than many so-called trained teachers possess. Think about it. Agatha can provide a reference, and I'd be happy to introduce you to our headmistress." The idea took root in Eleanor's mind, growing stronger over the following days. Teaching. It had never occurred to her as a possibility, but why not? She had the education, even if it had been acquired unconventionally, and the thought of helping young girls learn, of perhaps sparing them some of the limitations she had faced, appealed to something deep within her. It was during one of Agatha's evening gatherings, about 6 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, that her life took another unexpected turn. The sitting room was crowded with the usual collection of writers and reformers when a latecomer arrived, bringing with him a gust of cold November air and an aura of quiet authority. "Agatha, forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice cultured but warm. "I was hoping to catch you before you retired for the evening." "Elias!" Agatha exclaimed with genuine pleasure. Come in, everyone, this is Dr. Elias Reed, one of London's finest physicians and a tireless advocate for public health reform." Eleanor looked up from her book and felt her breath catch. Dr. Reed was perhaps 35, tall and lean, with dark blonde hair that fell across his forehead, grey-blue eyes that held both intelligence and kindness, and features that were more interesting than conventionally handsome. He wore a well-tailored but slightly rumpled suit, and there was an ink stain on his cuff that suggested a man more concerned with his work than his appearance. "I won't stay long," he said, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Davies. "I'm actually here on a rather unusual errand. I'm looking for a governess." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him with surprise. Dr. Reed smiled ruefully. I know. A bachelor physician seeking a governess. It sounds like the beginning of a scandalous novel, but I assure you the situation is entirely proper. My sister passed away 6 months ago, leaving behind 2 children, a girl of 10 and a boy of 7. They've been living with me in Mayfair, but they need proper education and care. I've tried 3 governesses already, but none have lasted more than a few weeks. The children are spirited. Spirited, Agatha repeated with amusement. Is that what we're calling it? They're grieving, Elias said quietly. They've lost their mother, and they're angry at the world. They need someone with patience, intelligence, and genuine compassion, someone who can see past their behavior to the pain beneath. I thought perhaps you might know someone suitable. Eleanor felt Agatha's eyes on her before her aunt spoke. As it happens, Elias, I may have just the person. My niece Eleanor is staying with me. She's exceptionally well-educated, kind-hearted, and in need of a position. Eleanor's face flushed as every eye in the room turned to her. Aunt Agatha, I couldn't possibly— Why not? Agatha challenged. You were just saying yesterday that you needed to find work. Here's an opportunity. Dr. Reed crossed the room to where Eleanor sat, studying her with those perceptive grey-blue eyes. Miss Hartley, is it? Or should I say Mrs. Pemberton? So he knew. Of course he knew. Everyone in London knew about the runaway bride. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed. Miss Hartley, if you please. The marriage was never consummated, and annulment proceedings are underway. I see. His expression revealed neither judgment nor pity, only thoughtful consideration. And you're interested in the position? I have no formal training as a governess, Eleanor said honestly, but I'm well educated, and I'm willing to learn. I can teach languages, literature, mathematics, history, and natural sciences. I play the piano adequately, and I have some skill in watercolors. What about compassion? Elias asked. Can you teach that? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I can try. I know what it's like to feel trapped, to be angry at circumstances beyond your control, to grieve for a life that might have been. Perhaps that experience would be useful. Something shifted in Elias's expression, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Perhaps it would. Would you be willing to meet the children? See if you suit each other? I should warn you, they've been quite creative in driving away previous governesses. The last one left after they put a frog in her bed. Despite herself, Eleanor smiled. I grew up with a younger sister who was equally creative. I think I can handle a frog. Then shall we say tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock at my residence in Harley Street. Agatha can provide the exact address. I'll be there, Eleanor promised. After Dr. Reed departed, Agatha squeezed Eleanor's hand. This could be good for you, my dear. Elias is a good man, one of the few I trust completely. His sister's death devastated him, and those children need someone who can help them heal. That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed in the small but comfortable room Agatha had given her, she found herself thinking not about the position or the children, but about Dr. Elias Reed himself. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, not the calculating assessment Sterling had always employed, not the dismissive condescension her father had perfected, but genuine interest. He had looked at her as if she were a person, not a problem to be solved or a possession to be managed. It was a small thing, perhaps, but to Eleanor, who had spent her entire life being evaluated solely on her appearance and her ability to conform, it felt revolutionary. The following afternoon, Eleanor stood before the elegant townhouse on Harley Street, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She wore one of the simple day dresses Agatha had helped her purchase, her hair arranged in a modest style, her appearance respectable, but not ostentatious. Dr. Reed himself answered the door, still in his shirt sleeves, his waistcoat unbuttoned, looking harried and slightly desperate. "Miss Hartley, thank God. The children have locked themselves in the nursery and are refusing to come out. They've declared that they don't want another governess and that I can't make them cooperate. I'm beginning to think they're right." Eleanor surprised herself by laughing. "Then perhaps I shouldn't present myself as a governess. May I try something different?" "At this point, I'm willing to try anything," Elias admitted, leading her up the stairs. Outside the nursery door, Eleanor could hear muffled voices, a girl's defiant tone and a younger boy's tearful protests. She knocked gently. "Hello? My name is Eleanor. I'm not here to be your governess. I'm here because I'm new to London and rather lonely, and I thought perhaps you might be lonely too. Would you be willing to talk to me? Just talk, nothing more." Silence. Then cautiously, "Why should we believe you?" "Because I'm telling the truth," Eleanor said simply. "I don't want to force you to do anything. I just thought we might be friends. But if you'd rather I left, I will." More silence. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a crack, revealing a girl with dark hair and suspicious grey eyes, her uncle's eyes. "You're the runaway bride, aren't you? I saw your picture in the newspaper." "Yes," Eleanor admitted, "I am." "Why did you run away?" "Because the man I married was cruel, and I decided I deserved better." The girl considered this, then opened the door wider. "I'm Lily. That's my brother Thomas. He's 7, and he cries a lot because he misses Mama." A small boy with blonde curls and tear-stained cheeks peered out from behind his sister. "I don't cry a lot," he protested. "It's all right if you do," Eleanor said gently. "I've cried quite a lot myself lately. Sometimes crying is the only thing that helps." Thomas studied her with solemn eyes. "Do you miss your mama?" "I do," Eleanor said, "though my situation is different from yours. But I understand what it's like to lose something precious and feel angry and sad about it." "The other governesses didn't understand," Lily said, her defiance crumbling slightly. "They just wanted us to be quiet and obedient and pretend everything was fine. But everything isn't fine." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It isn't. And pretending won't make it so. But perhaps together we could make things a little bit better. Not fine, but better. Would you be willing to try?" Lily and Thomas exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Lily nodded. "You can stay. But we're not calling you Miss Hartley like the others. That's too formal. What would you like to call me?" "Just Eleanor," Thomas said shyly, "if that's all right." "That's perfectly all right," Eleanor said, feeling something warm unfold in her chest. "In fact, I think I'd prefer it." She glanced back at Dr. Reed, who stood at the top of the stairs, watching the exchange with an expression of wonder and relief. Their eyes met, and in that moment Eleanor felt something shift, a connection, tentative and fragile, but real nonetheless. She had come to London broken and desperate, believing herself ruined beyond redemption. But here, in this house with these grieving children and their compassionate uncle, she was beginning to discover that endings could also be beginnings, that loss could lead to unexpected discoveries, and that sometimes the most important journeys began with a single step away from everything you'd ever known. Eleanor Hartley had walked away from a golden cage. Now she was about to discover what it meant to truly fly. The winter of 1888 transformed into the spring of 1889, and with it Eleanor Hartley transformed as well. The months she had spent in the Reed household had worked a quiet magic upon her, restoring not just her confidence, but revealing depths of strength and capability she had never known she possessed. The children had become her greatest joy. Lily, initially so guarded and defiant, had blossomed under Eleanor's patient guidance. She was brilliant, with a hunger for knowledge that reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. Together they studied not just the expected subjects of literature and French, but also mathematics, natural sciences, and even Latin, subjects Lily devoured with fierce enthusiasm. Thomas, sensitive and artistic, had found in Eleanor someone who valued his gentle nature rather than trying to toughen him into conventional masculinity. His watercolors now decorated the schoolroom walls, and his tears came less frequently as the sharp edges of grief gradually softened. But it was her relationship with Dr. Elias Reed that had surprised Eleanor most profoundly. What had begun as a professional arrangement had evolved into something far more complex and precious, a friendship built on mutual respect, intellectual compatibility, and a growing affection that neither of them had quite acknowledged aloud. Elias was unlike any man Eleanor had ever known. He treated her as an equal, sought her opinions on matters both trivial and significant, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and observations. Their evenings, after the children were abed, had become a cherished ritual. They would sit in his study, discussing his medical cases, her educational theories, the books they were reading, the state of the world. He made her laugh with his dry wit, challenged her assumptions with thoughtful questions, and listened, truly listened, when she spoke. "You've been good for them," Elias said one evening in late April, as they sat by the fire in his study. "For Lily and Thomas, they're different children than they were 6 months ago, happier, more settled." "They've been good for me as well," Eleanor replied, setting down her teacup. "They've given me purpose, a reason to wake each morning with anticipation rather than dread." Elias studied her in the firelight, his grey-blue eyes thoughtful. "And what about after? Have you thought about your future, Eleanor? The annulment will be finalized soon. You'll be free to make your own choices." "I am making my own choices," she said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do." Something flickered in his expression, hope, perhaps, or longing. But before he could respond, they were interrupted by his housekeeper, announcing a late visitor. Agatha Hartley swept into the study, her eyes bright with excitement and mischief. "Eleanor, my dear, I have news. The Duchess of Pembroke is hosting a charity gala next week, a fundraiser for the new women's hospital. She's invited me, and I'm to bring a guest. I want that guest to be you." Eleanor's stomach clenched with anxiety. "Aunt Agatha, I can't possibly attend a society event. I'm still what? Still the subject of gossip? My dear girl, you'll always be the subject of gossip. The question is whether you'll let that define you, or whether you'll hold your head high and show society that you're not ashamed of choosing dignity over degradation." "She has a point," Elias said quietly. "You've been hiding long enough, Eleanor. Perhaps it's time to stop hiding." "I'm not hiding," Eleanor protested. "I'm simply living my life away from the scrutiny of people who have already judged me." "Then prove them wrong," Agatha challenged. "Show them that you're not broken or defeated. Show them that you're thriving. Besides, the Duchess is a progressive woman, a supporter of women's education and rights. She specifically asked me to bring you. She wants to meet the woman who had the courage to walk away." Eleanor looked between her aunt and Elias, seeing the encouragement in both their faces. The thought of returning to society, of facing the whispers and stares, filled her with dread. But another part of her, the part that had been growing stronger these past months, bristled at the idea of remaining in the shadows, as if she had something to be ashamed of. "I have nothing suitable to wear," she said finally, and Agatha's face broke into a triumphant smile. "Leave that to me. We have a week to prepare, and I know an excellent modiste who owes me a favor." The week passed in a flurry of preparations. Agatha's modiste created a gown that was both elegant and subtly defiant, deep emerald silk that brought out the green in Eleanor's eyes, with a modern cut that eschewed excessive frills for clean, sophisticated lines. It was a dress that announced its wearer as a woman of substance and independence, not a debutante seeking approval. The evening of the gala arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if spring itself conspired to bolster Eleanor's courage. As she descended the stairs of Agatha's house, she found both her aunt and Elias waiting in the entrance hall. Elias had been invited as well, his work with public health initiatives making him a valued guest at such charitable events. "You look magnificent," Elias said, and there was something in his voice that made Eleanor's heart quicken. He looked distinguished himself in formal evening wear, his usual scholarly dishevelment replaced by polished elegance. The Duchess of Pembroke's London residence was ablaze with light, its ballroom filled with the cream of society. As Eleanor entered on Agatha's arm, with Elias following close behind, she felt the ripple of recognition move through the crowd. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and the whispers began. "That's her. The runaway bride. The scandal of last season. I heard she's working as a governess now. Can you imagine?" Eleanor kept her spine straight, her expression serene, refusing to show the anxiety churning in her stomach. Agatha squeezed her arm encouragingly. "Your Grace," Agatha said as they approached their hostess, a handsome woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and an air of unshakable confidence. "May I present my niece, Miss Eleanor Hartley?" The Duchess extended her hand warmly. "Miss Hartley, I'm delighted you accepted my invitation. I've been eager to meet you. Your aunt speaks very highly of your work with Dr. Reed's niece and nephew." "Your Grace is very kind," Eleanor murmured, surprised by the genuine warmth in the Duchess's greeting. "Not kind, merely observant. I've known too many women trapped in miserable marriages, suffering in silence because society demands it. You had the courage to refuse that fate. That's not scandalous, my dear. That's admirable." The Duchess's public endorsement sent another ripple through the crowd, this one of reassessment. If the Duchess of Pembroke approved of Eleanor Hartley, perhaps the scandal was not quite as clear-cut as society had assumed. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself cautiously relaxing. Several progressive-minded women approached her, expressing support and curiosity about her work as a governess. Margaret Thornton was there, introducing Eleanor to other educators and reformers. Elias remained nearby, a steady, supportive presence, though he gave her space to navigate the social waters on her own. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Eleanor saw them across the ballroom. Sterling Pemberton and Charlotte Fairfax, now Charlotte Pemberton. They had married quietly 3 months after the annulment was finalized, a hasty affair that had raised eyebrows even among those who had condemned Eleanor's departure. Charlotte looked resplendent in pink silk and diamonds, her dark hair elaborately styled, her beauty undeniable. But there was a hardness around her mouth, a brittleness in her laughter that suggested all was not well in the Pemberton household. Sterling stood beside her, his expression one of forced joviality, his hand possessive on her arm. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Eleanor saw the shock register on Sterling's face. He had clearly not expected to encounter her here, in this bastion of respectable society, looking confident and elegant rather than broken and ashamed. Charlotte noticed her husband's reaction and followed his gaze. Her face paled, then flushed with anger. She said something sharp to Sterling, who shook his head, but Charlotte was already moving through the crowd toward Eleanor with the determination of a woman on a mission. "Well," Charlotte said loudly enough to draw attention from nearby guests, "if it isn't the famous runaway bride. How brave of you to show your face in polite society, Miss Hartley. Or do you still insist on using that name, despite having been Mrs. Pemberton, however briefly?" Eleanor felt every eye in their vicinity turn toward them, felt the familiar flutter of panic in her chest. But then she felt Elias's presence at her shoulder, steady and reassuring, and she drew strength from it. "I use the name I was born with, Mrs. Pemberton," Eleanor said calmly. "As I'm sure you're aware, the annulment restored my maiden name along with my freedom." "Freedom?" Charlotte laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "Is that what you call working as a servant? Teaching other people's children for wages, how the mighty have fallen?" "I call it honest work," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "I'm proud of what I do. The children I teach are bright, curious, and deserving of an education that will allow them to think for themselves. It's meaningful work, Mrs. Pemberton. Can you say the same of your own pursuits?" Charlotte's eyes flashed with fury. "My pursuits? I'm the wife of a future baron. I manage one of the finest estates in Gloucestershire. I'm received everywhere by everyone. While you're a social pariah, reduced to earning your living like a common tradesperson. Better a common tradesperson with dignity than a baroness without it," Eleanor said quietly. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Charlotte's face contorted with rage, but before she could respond, Sterling appeared at her side, his hand gripping her elbow with barely concealed force. "Charlotte, that's enough," he said, his voice tight with anger and something else. Embarrassment, perhaps, or shame. He looked at Eleanor, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the assessment of what she had become versus what he had expected. "Miss Hartley, you're looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. I am well. Very well, in fact." "I'm glad to hear it." His tone suggested he was anything but glad. "I trust there are no hard feelings about past events. It was an unfortunate situation for all involved." "Unfortunate," Eleanor repeated, tasting the inadequacy of the word. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it, though I prefer to think of it as fortunate. Fortunate that I discovered your true character before I wasted more than a single day as your wife." Sterling's face darkened. "You always did have an inflated sense of your own worth, Eleanor. I tried to teach you humility, but you were too stubborn to learn." "No," Elias's voice cut in, calm but edged with steel. "She was too intelligent to accept your version of humility, which was really just another word for subjugation. Miss Hartley has more worth in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire being, Pemberton. And if you had the sense God gave a goose, you would have recognized that and treated her accordingly." Sterling turned to Elias with barely concealed contempt. "And you are Dr. Elias Reed. Miss Hartley is governess to my niece and nephew, and I count myself extraordinarily fortunate to have her in my household. She's transformed two grieving children into happy, thriving young people through patience, intelligence, and genuine compassion, qualities you clearly wouldn't recognize if they struck you in the face." A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation. Eleanor saw the Duchess of Pembroke watching with keen interest, saw Agatha's proud smile, saw the mixture of shock and fascination on the faces of society's elite. "How touching," Charlotte sneered. "The governess and her employer. How very cozy. Tell me, Dr. Reed, does Miss Hartley's employment include duties beyond the schoolroom?" The insinuation was clear and vicious. Eleanor felt her face burn with humiliation and anger. But before she could respond, Elias stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "Madam, you will apologize to Miss Hartley at once, or I will ensure that every person in this room knows exactly what kind of woman you are. The kind who destroys another woman's wedding day for her own selfish purposes, who flaunts her affair with a married man, and who now has the audacity to question the character of someone infinitely superior to herself." Charlotte's face went white, then red. "How dare you? How dare I speak the truth? Rather easily, as it happens. Everyone in this room knows that you and Pemberton were carrying on an affair long before his marriage to Miss Hartley. Everyone knows that you orchestrated that scene at the wedding to humiliate her and claim what you wanted. And everyone knows that your marriage has been anything but happy. The bruises on your arm, poorly concealed by your gloves, suggest that Pemberton's true nature has revealed itself to you as well. So before you cast aspersions on Miss Hartley's character, perhaps you should examine your own situation." The silence that followed was absolute. Charlotte's hand flew to her arm, where indeed the edge of a bruise was visible above her glove. Sterling's face had gone purple with rage and humiliation. "This is slander," Sterling blustered. "I'll have you brought up on charges." "Please do," Elias said calmly. "I'm sure a court of law would be very interested in examining the evidence of your character. Miss Hartley's testimony alone would be damning, but I suspect there are others who could speak to your cruelty and dishonesty." The Duchess of Pembroke chose that moment to intervene, gliding forward with the authority of her position. "I think this conversation has run its course. Mr. and Mrs. Pemberton, perhaps you should take your leave. This is a charitable event, and your presence is creating an uncharitable atmosphere." It was a dismissal, clear and unequivocal. Sterling looked as though he might protest, but the Duchess's expression brooked no argument. With a final venomous glare at Eleanor and Elias, he steered Charlotte toward the exit, her head held high, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. As they departed, the ballroom erupted in whispers. But this time, Eleanor noticed, the tone was different. People were looking at her not with condemnation, but with sympathy, even admiration. The Duchess's public support, combined with Elias's passionate defense, had shifted the narrative. "Well," Agatha said, appearing at Eleanor's side with a glass of champagne, "that was quite the spectacle. Are you all right, my dear?" Eleanor realized she was trembling, but not with fear or shame, with relief, with triumph, with the exhilarating sense of having finally, truly stood up for herself. "I'm more than all right," she said, accepting the champagne. "I'm free." Elias was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Eleanor, I hope I didn't overstep. I couldn't stand by and let them malign you." "You didn't overstep," she said softly. "You defended me when I needed defending." "Thank you, Elias." "There's something I need to say," he began, then hesitated, glancing around at the curious faces still watching them. "Perhaps not here. Could we speak privately?" The Duchess, overhearing, smiled knowingly. "Use my conservatory, Dr. Reed. Second door on the left. You'll have privacy there." Eleanor followed Elias through the ballroom, aware of the speculative glances following them, but no longer caring. The conservatory was a glass-enclosed paradise of exotic plants and flowers, lit by soft lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Eleanor," Elias began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of nervous uncertainty that she found endearing. "I've been trying to find the right moment to say this, but there never seems to be a right moment, so I'm just going to say it. These past months with you in my home have been the happiest I've known since my sister died. You've brought light and warmth and laughter back into our lives. Lily and Thomas adore you. And I—" He paused, meeting her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "I've fallen in love with you, Eleanor. Completely, irrevocably in love with you. I know the timing is terrible. I know you've just escaped one marriage and probably have no desire to consider another. I know I'm your employer, which makes this entirely inappropriate. But I can't keep silent any longer. You deserve to know how I feel, even if you can't return those feelings." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. "Elias, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated. Your position in my household is secure regardless of your answer. I just needed you to know that you're valued, cherished, loved, not for your name or your connections or your ability to be obedient, but for who you are. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength, your kindness. You're extraordinary, Eleanor, and I would be honored, more than honored, if you would consider allowing me to court you properly." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "You want to court me? After everything? After the scandal, the gossip, the social stigma? "I want to court you because of everything," Elias said firmly. "Because you had the courage to walk away from a life that would have destroyed your spirit. Because you've built a new life on your own terms. Because you see people. including 2 grieving children, with compassion and understanding. Because when you speak, I want to listen. Because when you smile, the whole world seems brighter. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Oh, Elias," Eleanor whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I've been so afraid to hope, so afraid to believe that I could have this. Could have love that's real and true and based on mutual respect. But I love you too. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first evening when you looked at me as if I were a person, not a problem." His face transformed with joy, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious and irreplaceable. "Then you'll let me court you, properly, with all the respect and devotion you deserve?" "Yes," Eleanor said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, Elias, I will." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "And eventually, not now, but when you're ready, would you consider marrying me? Being not just a governess to Lily and Thomas, but their aunt. Being my wife, my partner, my equal in all things." Eleanor thought of Sterling's proposal, delivered with cold calculation and the assumption of her compliance. She thought of the life she had been meant to live, silent, obedient, diminished. And then she looked at Elias, at the love and respect shining in his eyes, at the promise of a partnership built on equality and mutual admiration. "Yes," she said again, more certainly this time. "When I'm ready, when we're both ready, I will marry you, Elias Reed, and I will be proud to be your wife." He kissed her then, gently and reverently, and Eleanor felt the last chains of her past fall away. She had walked away from a golden cage and into an uncertain future. But that uncertainty had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to a love she had never dared to dream possible. When they returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, the whispers began again, but Eleanor no longer cared. Let them talk. Let them speculate. She had found something more valuable than society's approval. She had found herself, and in finding herself, she had found love. The runaway bride had become something far more powerful, a woman who knew her own worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. The summer of 1889 brought with it a transformation that rippled through London society like a stone cast into still water. The announcement of Eleanor Hartley's engagement to Dr. Elias Reed appeared in the Times on a warm June morning, and the reaction was as varied as it was vociferous. In progressive circles, the news was celebrated as a triumph of love over convention, of personal choice over social expectation. Agatha Hartley hosted a celebratory dinner at Bedford Square, where writers, educators and reformers toasted the couple with genuine enthusiasm. Margaret Thornton declared it the most romantic story she had ever heard, and the Duchess of Pembroke sent an exquisite silver tea service with a note expressing her delight. In more conservative quarters, however, the engagement was met with scandal and disapproval. How dare the runaway bride, barely a year removed from her first disastrous marriage, presume to marry again? And to a physician, no less. A man who worked for his living, who treated patients from all classes, who held dangerously progressive views on public health and women's education. The matrons of Mayfair clucked their tongues and predicted disaster. Eleanor found that she cared remarkably little for their opinions. She stood in the drawing-room of the Harley Street house, now truly her home rather than merely her place of employment, watching as Lily practiced her piano. The girl had grown taller over the past months, losing some of her childish roundness, her features beginning to hint at the beautiful woman she would become. But more importantly, she had regained her joy, her natural exuberance, no longer shadowed by grief. "Eleanor," Lily said, pausing in her practice, "when you marry Uncle Elias, will you still be our governess?" Eleanor crossed to the piano, settling beside Lily on the bench. "I'll be your aunt, which is even better. I'll still teach you if you'd like, but as family rather than as an employee." "Good," Lily said with satisfaction. "I told Thomas that you wouldn't leave us. He was worried, you know. He's afraid that everyone he loves will go away." Eleanor's heart clenched with sympathy. "I'm not going anywhere, darling. This is my home now, and you and Thomas are my family. Nothing will change that." "Everything's changed already, though," Lily observed with the unsettling perceptiveness of childhood. "But in a good way. Uncle Elias smiles now. He didn't used to smile very much before you came, and Thomas doesn't have nightmares anymore. And She paused, her fingers resting on the piano keys. "I'm not so angry all the time. I miss Mama still, but it doesn't hurt quite so much." "That's how healing works," Eleanor said gently. "The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes something you can carry rather than something that crushes you." Lily turned to look at her with those serious grey eyes, so like her uncle's. "Is that what happened to you, with Mr. Pemberton and the wedding? Did you heal?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Yes, I think I did. What happened was painful and humiliating, but it also freed me to become who I was meant to be. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things." "Then I'm glad Mr. Pemberton was horrid to you," Lily declared with childish logic. "Because otherwise you wouldn't have come to us, and Uncle Elias wouldn't be happy, and we wouldn't be a family." Eleanor laughed, pulling Lily into a hug. "That's one way to look at it, I suppose." The sound of the front door opening announced Elias's return from his rounds at the hospital. Eleanor heard his voice in the entrance hall, speaking with the housekeeper, and felt the now familiar flutter of happiness that his presence always brought. Even after months of living under the same roof, of sharing meals and conversations and quiet evenings by the fire, she still felt that thrill of anticipation when he came home. He appeared in the doorway of the drawing room, his medical bag in hand, his face tired but lighting up when he saw her. "There you are. I have news." "Good news or bad news?" Eleanor asked, noting the mixture of excitement and apprehension in his expression. "That depends on your perspective," Elias said, setting down his bag and crossing to where she stood. "I've been offered a position, director of the new public health clinic in Kensington. It's a significant opportunity, a chance to implement real reforms in how we treat patients from all economic backgrounds. But it would mean longer hours, more responsibility, and likely more controversy. The position is funded by several progressive philanthropists, including the Duchess of Pembroke, but it's already drawing criticism from more conservative medical circles. "You want to accept it," Eleanor said, reading the eagerness beneath his cautious tone. "I do," Elias admitted. "But I wanted to discuss it with you first. We're to be married in 2 months, Eleanor. This decision affects you as much as it affects me. If I take this position, you'll be the wife of a controversial physician, subject to even more scrutiny and criticism than you've already endured. I won't accept it if you have reservations." Eleanor felt a surge of love for this man who valued her opinion, who saw their marriage as a partnership rather than a hierarchy. "Elias, this is your life's work, your passion. How could I possibly object to you pursuing it? I'm proud of what you do, of your commitment to helping people regardless of their ability to pay. If anything, I'd like to help." "Help?" Elias looked surprised. "How do you mean?" "The clinic will need administrative support, won't it? Record-keeping, correspondence, coordination with charitable organizations. I may not have medical training, but I'm educated and organized. I could be useful." Elias's face broke into a wide smile. "You want to work at the clinic? Eleanor, yes, that would be wonderful. But are you certain? It won't be glamorous work. The patients will be poor, often desperately so. The conditions will be challenging." "I'm certain," Eleanor said firmly. "I've spent my entire life being decorative and useless. I want to do something meaningful, something that matters, and I want to do it alongside you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," Eleanor teased. "I was beginning to worry." Their moment was interrupted by Thomas bursting into the room, his blonde curls dishevelled, his face flushed with excitement. "Uncle Elias, Eleanor, come see what I've painted. It's a picture of all of us, you and Eleanor and Lily and me, and we're having a picnic in the park." They followed the boy to the schoolroom, where indeed a charming, if somewhat primitive watercolor depicted 4 figures seated on a blanket beneath a tree. The figures were recognizable, despite Thomas's limited artistic skill. Elias tall and dark-haired, Eleanor in a green dress, Lily with her serious expression, and Thomas himself with his characteristic curls. "It's beautiful, darling," Eleanor said, genuinely moved. "We'll frame it and hang it in the drawing room." "Really?" Thomas's face shone with pride. "Even though the hands are wrong?" "Lily said the hands look like spiders." "The hands are perfect," Eleanor assured him, shooting Lily a quelling look, "and it captures something more important than technical perfection. It captures love." That evening, after the children were in bed, Eleanor and Elias sat in his study, discussing the practical arrangements for their wedding. They had decided on a small, private ceremony at a progressive church in Bloomsbury, with only close friends and family in attendance. There would be no elaborate reception, no society spectacle, just a simple celebration of their commitment to each other. "Have you heard from your parents?" Elias asked gently, knowing it was a sensitive subject. Eleanor shook her head. "Father hasn't responded to any of my letters. Mother writes occasionally, brief notes that say very little. She's caught between her loyalty to father and her love for me. I don't envy her position." "And Beatrice?" "Beatrice writes regularly, bless her. She's furious with father for disowning me. She says she's going to refuse any marriage he tries to arrange for her, that she'd rather be a spinster than end up like—" Eleanor paused, then continued quietly, "than end up like I almost did." "Your sister sounds like a woman of sense," Elias observed. "I look forward to meeting her properly." "She's threatened to attend the wedding whether father permits it or not," Eleanor said with a smile. "She's 17 now, and developing quite the rebellious streak. I think Aunt Agatha is a bad influence." "Or a good one, depending on your perspective," Elias said with amusement. Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the front door. It was late, nearly 10 o'clock, and they weren't expecting visitors. Eleanor heard the housekeeper's voice, then a woman's voice, cultured but strained. A moment later, the housekeeper appeared in the study doorway, her expression troubled. "Dr. Reed, there's a Mrs. Pemberton here to see Miss Hartley. She says it's urgent." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Charlotte, what could she possibly want? "Show her in," Elias said, his hand finding Eleanor's in a gesture of support. Charlotte Pemberton entered the study looking nothing like the triumphant woman who had confronted Eleanor at the Duchess's gala. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, and she moved with the careful precision of someone in pain. The bruise on her arm that Elias had noticed months ago had been joined by others, poorly concealed by powder and carefully arranged clothing. "Mrs. Pemberton," Eleanor said, rising from her chair, "this is unexpected." "I know I have no right to come here," Charlotte said, her voice trembling. "After everything I've done to you, all the pain I've caused, but I didn't know where else to turn." "Are you injured?" Elias asked, his physician's instincts overriding any personal animosity. "Do you need medical attention?" Charlotte's composure crumbled. "I need help. She broke down in tears, her whole body shaking with sobs. "I've made such a terrible mistake. You were right, Eleanor. You were right about everything." Eleanor exchanged glances with Elias, then guided Charlotte to a chair. "Tell us what's happened." The story that emerged was both predictable and heartbreaking. Sterling's charm had evaporated within weeks of their marriage, revealing the cruel, controlling man beneath. "He was a drunk," Charlotte confessed, "and when he drank, he became violent. He had isolated her from her friends, controlled every aspect of her life, and made it clear that she was his property to do with as he pleased. The bruises were only the visible evidence of his abuse." "I thought I loved him," Charlotte whispered. "I thought he loved me, but he doesn't love anyone. He only wants to possess and control. And now I'm trapped, just as you would have been if you hadn't been brave enough to leave." "Why have you come to me?" Eleanor asked, not unkindly, but genuinely curious. "Because you're the only person who understands what he is," Charlotte said. "Because you escaped, and I need to know how. I need to know if it's possible for me to escape too." Eleanor looked at Elias, seeing her own compassion reflected in his eyes. Whatever Charlotte had done, whatever role she had played in Eleanor's humiliation, she didn't deserve this. No woman deserved this. "It's possible," Eleanor said firmly. "It won't be easy, and it will require courage. But it's possible. Dr. Reed, can you examine Mrs. Pemberton's injuries? Document them?" "Of course," Elias said, already moving toward his medical bag. "Medical documentation will be crucial if you decide to seek legal separation, Mrs. Pemberton." Over the next hour, they helped Charlotte begin the process of extricating herself from her marriage. Elias documented her injuries with clinical precision, his face growing darker with each new bruise revealed. Eleanor wrote letters to Agatha and to a solicitor Agatha had recommended, a man known for his willingness to represent women in difficult divorce cases. They arranged for Charlotte to stay at a women's refuge run by one of Agatha's charitable organizations, a safe place where Sterling couldn't find her. "Why are you helping me?" Charlotte asked as she prepared to leave, wrapped in a borrowed cloak. "After what I did to you." Eleanor considered the question. "Because I know what it's like to feel trapped and powerless. Because no woman deserves to be treated as you've been treated. And because holding on to anger and resentment only poisons the person carrying it. I choose to let it go." Charlotte's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor, for everything. You deserved so much better than what Sterling and I did to you." "Yes, I did," Eleanor agreed simply, "but in a strange way you did me a favor. If that wedding had proceeded without incident, I would have been trapped in a marriage with a man who would have made my life miserable. Your intervention, however painful at the time, freed me to find real happiness, so perhaps in the end I should thank you." After Charlotte departed, escorted by one of Elias's trusted colleagues to the women's refuge, Eleanor and Elias stood together in the quiet study. "You're an extraordinary woman," Elias said softly. "To show such compassion to someone who hurt you so deeply, that takes remarkable strength of character. Or perhaps just the perspective that comes from having found happiness," Eleanor replied. "It's easier to forgive when you're no longer suffering." "Still," Elias said, pulling her close, "not everyone would have helped her. You could have turned her away, and no one would have blamed you." "But I would have blamed myself," Eleanor said. "And I've learned that I have to live with myself, with my choices. I want to be someone who helps when help is needed, regardless of the past." As they climbed the stairs to their separate bedrooms, propriety still demanded they maintain separate quarters until the wedding. Eleanor reflected on how far she had come. A year ago, she had been a woman defined by others' expectations, trapped in a life that wasn't her own. Now she was a woman who made her own choices, who helped others make theirs, who had found love and purpose and meaning. The golden cage had been beautiful, but freedom was infinitely more precious. 2 weeks later, Eleanor received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was familiar, her mother's careful script, but the content was surprising. "My dearest Eleanor, I am writing to you in secret, as your father has forbidden any communication. But I can no longer remain silent. I have watched you from afar these past months, through reports from friends and acquaintances, and I have seen you flourish in ways you never could have under our roof, or in the marriage we arranged for you. I was wrong, Eleanor. We were all wrong. We tried to fit you into a mold that was never meant for you, and in doing so, we nearly destroyed the beautiful, intelligent, compassionate woman you were meant to become. I am so very sorry. I cannot attend your wedding. Your father would never permit it, and I am not as brave as you. But please know that I will be thinking of you on that day, wishing you every happiness with Dr. Reed. From what I hear, he's a good man who values you as you deserve to be valued. Your sister Beatrice has my blessing to attend, though she must do so without your father's knowledge. She will tell you that she defied him, but the truth is that I am helping her. It's a small rebellion, perhaps, but it's the best I can offer. Be happy, my darling girl. Be free. Be yourself. That is all any mother should want for her daughter, and I am ashamed it took me so long to realize it. With all my love, Mother Eleanor read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was something, an acknowledgement, an apology, a blessing. It was enough. On a golden September morning, Eleanor Hartley became Eleanor Reed in a simple ceremony at the Progressive Church in Bloomsbury. Agatha stood as her matron of honour, beaming with pride. Beatrice was there, having indeed defied their father to attend, her young face alight with joy for her sister. Lily and Thomas served as attendants, solemn and proud in their roles. Margaret Thornton and the Duchess of Pembroke sat in the front pew, along with a collection of Elias's medical colleagues and Agatha's reformist friends. As Eleanor spoke her vows, looking into Elias's eyes and seeing nothing but love and respect and partnership, she thought of the woman she had been a year ago, frightened, trapped, diminished. That woman seemed like a stranger now. I, Eleanor, take you, Elias, to be my husband, she said clearly, to be my partner in all things, my equal in this marriage. I promise to honor you, to support you, to challenge you when needed, and comfort you when necessary. I promise to be myself, fully and completely, and to encourage you to do the same. I promise to build a life with you based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared purpose. They were not the traditional vows, but they were true. And when Elias slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Eleanor felt not the weight of chains, but the lightness of wings. The wedding breakfast was held at Agatha's house, a joyful, chaotic affair, with too many people crammed into too small a space, laughter and conversation flowing as freely as the champagne. Eleanor moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, and felt truly, completely happy. You look radiant, Beatrice said, hugging her sister tightly, like you're glowing from the inside out. I feel radiant, Eleanor admitted. Is that terribly vain? Not vain at all. You deserve this, Eleanor. You deserve all of this and more. As the afternoon faded into evening, Eleanor and Elias prepared to depart for their wedding trip, a week in the Lake District, where they would walk and talk and simply be together away from the demands of London. As they stood on the steps of Agatha's house, saying their final goodbyes, Eleanor looked back at the assembled group, her aunt, her sister, the children, the friends who had supported her through the darkest time of her life. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion, all of you, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for showing me that there was another way to live, for helping me find my wings. You found your own wings, my dear, Agatha said, her eyes suspiciously bright. We just reminded you that you had them. As the carriage pulled away, Eleanor leaned against Elias's shoulder, watching London pass by the window. She thought of Sterling and Charlotte, trapped in their miserable marriage. She thought of her father, rigid and unforgiving in his adherence to social convention. She thought of all the women still living in golden cages, believing they had no choice but to accept whatever life handed them. And she made a silent promise to herself and to them. She would live her life as an example of what was possible. She would work alongside Elias at the clinic, helping those who needed help. She would continue to teach and mentor young women, showing them that intelligence and independence were not shameful, but admirable. She would be visible and unapologetic in her happiness, a living testament to the power of choosing one's own path. The runaway bride had found her home at last, not in a place, but in a purpose, in a partnership, in the freedom to be fully, authentically herself. And that, Eleanor thought as Elias's hand found hers in the darkness of the carriage, was worth more than all the golden cages in the world. The spring of 1891 arrived in London with a profusion of blossoms and bird-song, as if nature itself celebrated the transformation that had taken place in the lives of those at the Harley Street house. Nearly 2 years had passed since Eleanor's wedding to Elias. 2 years that had been filled with purpose, growth, and a happiness so profound it sometimes took her breath away. Eleanor stood at the window of the clinic's administrative office in Kensington, watching the morning sun illuminate the queue of patients already forming outside. The clinic had been open for 18 months now, and its reputation had spread throughout London's working-class neighbourhoods. Here, people who could never afford a private physician's fees could receive quality medical care, their dignity intact, their ailments treated with the same skill and compassion that wealthier patients received in Harley Street consulting rooms. "Mrs. Reed, the Morning Post has arrived," said Miss Alice Winters, the young woman Eleanor had hired as her assistant 6 months prior. Alice was the daughter of a factory worker, bright and capable, given opportunities through the very educational reforms that Agatha and her colleagues had fought for. Eleanor took pride in providing her with meaningful employment. Among the letters was one bearing the Hartley family crest. Eleanor's heart quickened as she recognized her mother's handwriting. Lady Catherine's letters had become more frequent over the past year, their tone gradually warming from cautious to affectionate. Though Sir Edmund still refused to acknowledge Eleanor's existence, her mother had found small ways to maintain their connection. "My dearest Eleanor, I write with news that I hope will bring you joy. Your father has suffered a mild apoplexy. Before you worry, he is recovering well, though the physician has ordered complete rest and a reduction in his usual activities. The experience has, I believe, given him cause for reflection. He has not said so directly, you know your father's pride, but he has begun asking questions about you, how you are faring, whether you are happy, whether the clinic is successful. I take these questions as signs of a softening heart, though he would never admit it. More importantly, Beatrice has become engaged. The young man is a barrister, quite progressive in his views, and your father initially opposed the match. But Beatrice stood firm, and I supported her. I told your father that I would not see another daughter forced into a loveless arrangement, that I had learned from my mistakes with you. He was furious, but he eventually relented. Beatrice wishes you to know that she was inspired by your courage. She says you showed her that it was possible to choose one's own path, even when that path diverged from expectation. You have become her hero, Eleanor, as you have become mine. I hope that someday your father will find the courage to reach out to you himself. Until then, know that you are loved and thought of daily. Your devoted mother Eleanor read the letter twice, tears blurring her vision. It was not a complete reconciliation, but it was progress, and the knowledge that her choice, painful as it had helped her sister find the courage to choose her own happiness. That was a gift beyond measure. Good news, I hope? Elias's voice came from the doorway. He had just finished his morning rounds at the hospital and had come to the clinic, as he did most days, to see patients who could not afford hospital fees. Eleanor crossed to him, sharing the letter. As he read, his expression softened with understanding and sympathy. "Your mother is a brave woman," he said. "It takes courage to stand up to a man like your father, even in small ways." "She's learning," Eleanor said, "as I learned, as we all must learn, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the waiting room. Eleanor hurried out to find a young woman, heavily pregnant and clearly in distress, being supported by an older woman who Eleanor recognized as Mrs. Patterson, one of their regular patients. "Please, she needs help," Mrs. Patterson said urgently. "The baby's coming early, and she's got no one. Her husband died in a factory accident last month, and she's been living rough." Elias was already moving, his professional demeanor snapping into place. "Bring her to the examination room. Eleanor, fetch Dr. Morrison if she's available. We may need assistance." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Sarah Morrison, one of the few female physicians in London and a regular volunteer at the clinic, arrived within minutes. Together, she and Elias worked to deliver the baby while Eleanor stayed with the young mother, holding her hand, offering comfort and encouragement. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked gently during a brief respite between contractions. "Mary," the woman gasped. "Mary Fletcher. I'm sorry to be such trouble." "You're no trouble at all," Eleanor assured her. "You're exactly why this clinic exists. Every woman deserves safe care during childbirth, regardless of her circumstances." When the baby finally arrived, a healthy girl with a lusty cry, Mary wept with relief and joy and grief all mingled together. "My Tom would have loved her," she whispered, holding her daughter close. "He wanted a girl. Said he wanted to raise a daughter who would be strong and independent, who wouldn't have to depend on any man for her survival." "Then we'll make sure she has that chance," Eleanor said firmly. "There are organizations that can help you, Mary. Places where you can stay while you recover, people who can help you find work when you're ready. You don't have to face this alone." Over the following days, Eleanor worked with several charitable organizations to secure housing and support for Mary and her baby. It was work she had become skilled at over the past 18 months, connecting patients with resources, advocating for those who couldn't advocate for themselves, using her education and social connections to open doors that would otherwise remain closed. "You've found your calling," Agatha observed one evening when she visited for dinner. The family had gathered in the Harley Street dining room. Elias and Eleanor, Lily and Thomas, Agatha and Margaret Thornton, who had become a close friend. It was a chosen family, bound not by blood, but by affection and shared values. "I suppose I have," Eleanor agreed, "though I never imagined this would be my life. When I was growing up, I thought my purpose was to make an advantageous marriage and manage a household. I never dreamed I could do something meaningful, something that actually helped people." "You're helping more than just the patients," Margaret said. "You're showing young women like Alice that there are options beyond marriage and domestic service. You're proving that education and intelligence in women aren't liabilities, but assets." "Speaking of which," Lily interjected, her grey eyes bright with excitement, "I've been accepted to the North London Collegiate School. Miss Thornton helped me with my application." Eleanor felt a surge of pride and joy. Lily was now 12, poised on the brink of young womanhood, brilliant and curious and passionate about learning. The frightened, angry child she had been when Eleanor first arrived had blossomed into a confident, articulate young woman. "That's wonderful, darling," Eleanor said warmly. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "I think she would be proud of all of us," Lily said thoughtfully. "Uncle Elias is helping people who can't afford doctors. You're helping women and families find resources. Thomas is becoming an artist. We're all doing something meaningful. That's what Mama always wanted, for us to make a difference in the world." Thomas, now 9 and still as sensitive and artistic as ever, had indeed shown remarkable talent. His watercolors had progressed from childish efforts to genuinely skilled work, and Eleanor had arranged for him to study with a respected art teacher. He was a gentle soul in a world that often valued aggression over compassion, but Eleanor and Elias were determined to nurture his gifts rather than try to mold him into something he wasn't. "Your mama would be very proud," Elias said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "As am I of both of you, of both." Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the guests had departed, Eleanor and Elias sat in their private sitting room, a space they had created for themselves on the second floor of the house. It was filled with books and comfortable furniture, a fire crackling in the grate, the curtains drawn against the spring rain that had begun to fall. "I received an interesting letter today," Elias said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From the Royal College of Physicians. They're organizing a conference on public health initiatives, and they've asked me to present our work at the clinic. They want to know if our model could be replicated in other cities." Eleanor's face lit up with excitement. "Elias, that's wonderful. It means they're taking your work seriously, recognizing its value." "Our work," he corrected gently. Eleanor, you're as much a part of this clinic's success as I am. Your organizational skills, your ability to connect with patients, your advocacy work, none of this would function without you. I'm not a physician, Eleanor protested. I have no medical training. But you have something equally valuable: compassion, intelligence, and the ability to see people as human beings rather than cases or statistics. That's what makes the clinic special. That's what makes it work. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar sense of contentment that his presence always brought. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Marrying me? Taking on the scandal, the social complications, the controversy?" Elias turned to look at her, his grey-blue eyes serious. "Never. Not for a single moment. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor. You brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever. You've been a mother to Lily and Thomas in all but name. You've made me a better physician, a better man. How could I possibly regret that?" "I just worry sometimes," Eleanor admitted, "that I've limited your opportunities, that your association with the runaway bride has damaged your reputation." "My reputation is just fine," Elias said firmly. "Better than fine, actually. The physicians I respect admire what we're doing at the clinic. The ones who disapprove are generally the same ones who think medicine should be reserved for those who can pay handsomely for it. Their disapproval is a badge of honor." "When did you become so wise?" Eleanor teased. "I married you, didn't I? That was the wisest decision I ever made." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, entered with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Doctor Reed, but there's a gentleman downstairs asking to see Mrs. Reed. He says he's her father." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Her father, here, after nearly 2 years of silence, of disownment, of pretending she didn't exist. "Do you want me to send him away?" Elias asked, his hand finding hers. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. "No, I'll see him. But Elias, will you come with me?" "Of course, always." They descended the stairs together, and Eleanor found her father standing in the entrance hall, looking older and frailer than she remembered. The apoplexy her mother had mentioned had clearly taken its toll. His face was thinner, his posture less rigidly military, and there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before: uncertainty. "Father," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions churning inside her. "Eleanor?" Sir Edmund's voice was gruff, uncomfortable. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not intruding," she said, though they both knew it was a polite fiction. "This is my husband, Dr. Elias Reed. Elias, my father, Sir Edmund Hartley." The two men regarded each other with mutual wariness. Elias extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Sir Edmund shook it. "Shall we go into the drawing-room?" Eleanor suggested, leading the way. Once they were seated, an awkward silence descended. Sir Edmund looked around the room, taking in the comfortable but not ostentatious furnishings, the medical journals stacked on a side table, the children's artwork on the walls. "Your mother tells me you're working at a clinic," he said finally, "that you're helping the poor." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I assist with administration and patient advocacy. It's meaningful work." "It's not what I envisioned for you," Sir Edmund said, and Eleanor braced herself for criticism. "But instead," he continued, "I envisioned you as a baroness, mistress of a great estate, moving in the highest circles of society. I thought that was what would make you happy, what would give your life meaning." "I know you did," Eleanor said gently. "But that life would have destroyed me, Father. Sterling Pemberton would have destroyed me." Sir Edmund flinched at the name. "I've heard rumours about his treatment of his wife, about his drinking and his temper. I dismissed them at first, but your mother insisted I investigate. What I learned—" He paused, his face troubled. "I was wrong, Eleanor. About Pemberton, about what you needed, about everything." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. It was the closest thing to an apology she had ever heard from her father. "I've been a fool," Sir Edmund continued, his voice rough with emotion. "A proud, stubborn fool. I thought I knew what was best for you, but I didn't know you at all. I didn't see your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. I tried to fit you into a mold that was never meant for you, and when you broke free, I punished you for it. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm deeply, profoundly sorry." "Father!" Eleanor's voice broke. "Let me finish," he said. "I've spent the past 2 years telling myself that you were the one who had failed, that you had brought shame upon the family. But the truth is that I was the one who failed. I failed to protect you from a man who would have made you miserable. I failed to see that your happiness mattered more than social standing. I failed to be the father you deserved." He looked at Elias, his expression serious. "Dr. Reed, I've made inquiries about you, about your work, your character, your reputation. Everything I've learned suggests that you're a good man, that you treat my daughter with the respect and affection she deserves. I'm grateful to you for that." "I love your daughter, Sir Edmund," Elias said simply. "She's the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate that she chose to marry me." "As you should," Sir Edmund said, and there was the faintest hint of a smile on his face. He turned back to Eleanor. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance to know you, to be part of your life again, if you'll allow it." Eleanor looked at this man who had shaped so much of her early life, who had caused her such pain with his rigid expectations and his inability to see her as she truly was. She thought of Charlotte Pemberton, trapped in an abusive marriage. She thought of Mary Fletcher, alone and desperate with a newborn baby. She thought of all the women who had no choices, no options, no hope of escape. And she thought of the life she had built, meaningful, purposeful, filled with love and respect and genuine partnership. She had escaped the golden cage, and in doing so, she had found herself. "I'll allow it," she said quietly, "on one condition." "Name it," Sir Edmund said, "that you accept me as I am, not as you wish I were. I'm not going to become a society matron. I'm going to continue working at the clinic, helping people who need help. I'm going to continue being myself, fully and completely. If you can accept that, then yes, I would like you to be part of my life again." Sir Edmund nodded slowly. "I can accept that. I will accept that. You're my daughter, Eleanor, and I'm proud of you. It's taken me far too long to say it, but I'm proud of the woman you've become." The reconciliation was not instantaneous or complete. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. But over the following months, Sir Edmund became a regular visitor to the Harley Street house. He attended Lily's school performances and admired Thomas's artwork. He even visited the clinic, though the sight of the poor and desperate patients clearly discomforted him. But he came, and he tried, and gradually the relationship between father and daughter began to heal. Lady Catherine, freed from the constraint of secrecy, visited frequently, bringing news of Beatrice's upcoming wedding and the latest gossip from Gloucestershire. She had become an advocate for women's education, quietly supporting the same reforms she had once dismissed as radical and dangerous. One warm June afternoon, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor at the clinic. Charlotte Pemberton, no, Charlotte Fairfax again, having successfully obtained a divorce, stood in the waiting room, looking nervous but determined. "Eleanor," she said, "I hope you don't mind my coming. I wanted to thank you and to tell you something." They stepped into Eleanor's office, and Charlotte settled into a chair, her posture more relaxed than Eleanor had ever seen it. "I'm leaving England," Charlotte said. "I've accepted a position as a companion to an elderly lady in Italy. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and it will allow me to start fresh, away from the scandal and the memories." "I'm glad you're finding your own path," Eleanor said sincerely. "I wanted you to know that Sterling is ruined," Charlotte continued, "socially, financially, in every way. His drinking has worsened, and his behavior has become so erratic that even his family has distanced themselves from him. He's alone, Eleanor, and miserable, and it's entirely his own doing." Eleanor felt no satisfaction in this news, only a distant sadness for the waste of a life. "I hope he finds help," she said. "I hope he finds a way to change." Charlotte looked at her with something like wonder. "You're extraordinary, you know that. After everything he did to you, you can still wish him well. I don't think I could be so generous." "I don't wish him well for his sake," Eleanor explained. "I wish it for the sake of anyone else who might cross his path. But mostly, I simply don't think about him anymore. He's part of my past, and I'm focused on my present and my future." "Your present looks pretty wonderful," Charlotte observed, glancing around the office with its files and correspondence, the evidence of meaningful work. "You're happy, aren't you? Truly happy." "I am," Eleanor said simply. "I'm doing work that matters, with people I love, in a life I chose for myself. Yes, I'm happy." Mardit. After Charlotte departed, Eleanor stood at the window, watching the afternoon sun paint the London streets in shades of gold. She thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, standing in her wedding dress at Pemberton Hall, humiliated and heartbroken. That woman had believed herself ruined, destroyed beyond redemption. But she hadn't been destroyed. She had been freed. That evening the family gathered for dinner. Elias and Eleanor, Lily and Thomas, Agatha and Margaret, and now Sir Edmund and Lady Catherine as well. It was a blended family, unconventional by society's standards, but bound together by love and mutual respect. "I have an announcement," Lily said, her grey eyes sparkling with excitement. "I've been asked to give a speech at the school's prize-giving ceremony about the importance of education for girls. Miss Thornton suggested I talk about how education changed my life, how having Eleanor as my governess showed me what was possible." "That's wonderful, darling," Eleanor said, her heart swelling with pride. "Will you help me write it?" Lily asked. "I want to get it right. I want to make people understand that girls deserve the same opportunities as boys, that we're just as capable of learning and achieving great things." "I would be honored to help you," Eleanor said. As the conversation flowed around the table, Lily's speech, Thomas's upcoming art exhibition, Elias's presentation at the Royal College, Agatha's latest article, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was her life now, not the life she had been raised to expect, not the life that had been planned for her, but the life she had chosen for herself. She had been told that walking away from her wedding would ruin her. And in a sense it had. It had ruined the false, constrained version of herself that had been created by others' expectations. But from those ruins, she had built something far more valuable. An authentic life, lived on her own terms, filled with purpose and love and genuine happiness. Later that night, as Eleanor and Elias prepared for bed, he pulled her close, his arms warm and secure around her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sensing her reflective mood. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Eleanor said. "How the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. How losing everything can actually mean finding yourself. How being ruined can actually mean being freed." "Do you have any regrets?" Elias asked. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Did she regret the humiliation of that wedding day? The pain of being disowned by her father? The months of uncertainty and fear? Did she regret the scandal, the gossip, the social ostracism? "No," she said finally, "I don't regret any of it, because all of it led me here, to this life, to you, to the work we're doing, to the family we've built. If I could go back and change things, I wouldn't, because I might not end up here, and here is exactly where I want to be." "I love you, Eleanor Reed," Elias said, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for being brave enough to walk away. Thank you for being strong enough to build a new life. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for seeing me," Eleanor replied, "for valuing my mind as much as anything else, for treating me as an equal, for showing me what love could be when it's based on respect and partnership." As she drifted off to sleep that night, Eleanor thought of all the women still trapped in golden cages, still believing they had no choice but to accept whatever life handed them. She thought of the young girls like Lily, just beginning to understand their own potential. She thought of the future and all the possibilities it held. The Duke had roared that he had hired her as a governess, not a bride, but Eleanor had become so much more than either of those things. She had become herself, fully, authentically, unapologetically herself, and in doing so she had discovered that her silence, her refusal to accept degradation, had indeed spoken louder than any words. She had walked away from a life of privilege and constraint. She had endured scandal and social ostracism. She had rebuilt herself from the ruins of her reputation. And she had bloomed, not in the carefully tended garden of society's expectations, but in the wild, beautiful garden of her own choosing. Eleanor Hartley Reid had found her voice, her purpose, and her happiness. And that, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest triumph of all. If you enjoyed this story of courage, transformation, and finding true love against all odds, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that changed your life? Have you ever walked away from something that looked perfect but felt wrong? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how this tale resonated with you. And don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose your own path. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember, true freedom begins the moment you choose yourself.